days with her head in the books, never cared much to agonize over her looks. But the boys would all whisper in motion and stare. All the girls would just mutter that it wasn't fair. To college and get her degree, go to med school and then do her residency. But a suitor came calling when she turned 16, and he didn't quite care for her frivolous dreams. And he said, yeah, Aziza, yeah, Habibi, need a hard-working husband like me. Yeah, Aziza, it's my need. I'll pay for you to belong to me. To give her away, her mother just listened to what he would say, that Aziza was a woman and soon should be wed, that all of the schooling was ruining her head. And Baba said, yeah, Aziza, yeah, Habibi, come down from the clouds and face your destiny. Yeah, Aziza, yeah, Binti, a mother is what we expect you to be. So they painted her hands and he gave her a ring. All the girls started dancing and started to sing. What a beautiful wedding, they said to the bride, never stopping to think she was broken inside. And he said, yeah, Aziza, yeah, Habibi, just like me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amneya, for that really wonderful song, and we're going to look forward to hearing you perform again later in the evening. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for coming. My name is Gabriel Brodbar. I'm the Executive Director of the NYU Reynolds Program in Social Entrepreneurship, and I am so glad that you have chosen to spend your evening here with us for what I know is going to be an extraordinary conversation about moral courage and social change. Our guests tonight are really two towering figures in this space. We have Muslim reformer, artist, filmmaker, author, and winner of Oprah Winfrey's first Chutzpah Award, and I'm not making that up, Irshad Manji. And and also author, activist, philosopher, intellectual, Dr. Cornel West. So why this topic? What the heck does moral courage have to do with social entrepreneurship? The very short answer is really quite a bit. Social entrepreneurship is all about realizing sustainable social change. It's about disrupting equilibriums and challenging the status quo. Moral courage is all about standing up to that status quo. If social change is the destination, moral courage is the vehicle that's going to help us get there. And it's really been a critical part of every major movement of social change. And it's imperative that everyone participates. Now, fortunately, all of you can start to participate tonight just by participating in the conversation, and you can do that in two ways. You can tweet, and if you do that, please use hashtag moral courage and at NYU Reynolds. You can also jot down your questions on the index cards that you received at check-in. Runners are going to collect those in about 30 minutes, and Irshad and Dr. West will get to them, as many as they can, during the Q&A session, which will follow the discussion. Now, this is an especially a wonderful night because we are helping to launch Moral Courage TV, and that's really what this night is all about. And Moral Courage TV, for those of you who might not know, is Irshad's incredible new YouTube channel that profiles the brave men and women that are showing us great moral courage today, right now. People like Amneya, and of course, people like this as well.
My name is TJ Leiden. I'm a former neo-Nazi skinhead and white supremacist. I wish I could have those 15 years back. I was with a group called Hammerskin Nation. My job was to recruit kids into the movement. I'd drive around and give out CDs, and then 3 or 4 days later, I'd drive back by that high school. Kids would be waving me down. Do you have any more of that music? Yeah, but you need to come hang out with us. Once that camaraderie is built, then you say, Steve, he's got jumped last night. What are you going to do about that? You're just going to sit there and be a coward? And if they just say, oh, I'm not going to do nothing, then you show everybody else what happens to a coward. You beat them down in front of everybody. The violent aspect to the movement didn't worry me. I didn't care if I got killed. I didn't care if they buried me. I did not. That was just a price I was willing to pay. But when I thought about burying my son, if I didn't want my boys to grow up and be me, what was wrong with my premise of life? What was wrong with who I was? I was married to a woman who had 2 of my children, and I was afraid if I told her that, she would tell somebody and I'd get murdered. So I left the racist movement. I kidnapped both my sons, filed for divorce and legal custody of the kids. The only people I had was my family. My mom had seen the Museum of Tolerance and Rabbi Heyer on television, and she said the next morning I should go to that place. I said, Mom, okay, he's a rabbi. I'm a former Nazi. It's not gonna work, trust me. They actually asked me to come in. They asked me if I'd ever consider speaking out against my former friends. And I told them, well, I got to think about it, because I know what happens. I know the ramifications of speaking out against this group. And my brother, the cop, actually told me he spilt the milk. He basically said, you made a mess, go clean it up. So I hid my very first junior high and I did my very first talk. 24 hours later, the white supremacy movement had 6 websites about me. One website actually said, terminate on sight. There's 2 cassettes that are literally 90 minutes. We know where you live. We're gonna come kill you. We got your number, man. You better watch your back. When I was in the movement, I could have been killed because a rival gang could have been killed by guys inside my own group. It's no different now. Now I'm just doing something right. I'm doing something good. The people who should hate me the most, to be angry with me the most because of what I did in my past, embrace me the most. They think it's not still around, and it's like,
All things are so much better than
I've gotten almost 100 kids out of my former lifestyle of white supremacy, and I've gotten kids out of gangs too. You can help people in any way, shape, or form. Everybody can. You just have to be willing to do it. I am TJ, and I am Moral Courage.
Please join me in very warmly welcoming to the NYU Reynolds stage my brother from another mother, Dr. Cornel West, and my sister from another Mr. Irshad Manji.
What a blessing to be here, and how delighted I am to be on the stage with my dear sister. She is such a powerful force for good. It's a combination of critical intelligence, combative imagination, and moral courage. And I want to begin by just raising a question. What do you understand moral courage to be?
Well, frankly, I'd love to hear your take on it, Dr. West, since as far as I'm concerned, you are the master of moral courage. That's what I teach here at NYU to the degree that it is teachable. Moral courage actually is a phrase that doesn't come from me. It comes from Robert F. Kennedy. And he defined it as the willingness to speak truth to power within your community for a greater good. In other words, for a good that is more than what the community itself will benefit from. And he emphasized that it starts within your community because, as he pointed out, there is no backlash more painful than that which comes from your own, right? You can stand up to so-called outsiders, point fingers all you want, and say back to your community, look at what I'm doing to stand up for us against them. I know where I belong. But the moment you point out that there's abuse of power within our ranks too, and that we can't just keep pointing fingers at everybody else, that's when the security blanket of instant belonging disappears. Now what? And what Bobby Kennedy was getting at, and by the way, he talked about this in South Africa in front of an audience of white students, urging them to rise up against apartheid. And he pointed out, you may think that I'm a foreigner coming here to lecture you about racism when my country has its own problems with it, thank you very much. But he said, understand, I am standing up to racism in my American community. And I've had to be pushed to get there. It didn't happen naturally for me. I had to be taught by other people about how to do that. And so I come here with empathy. And I come here because we are in this together.
Wow, powerful, powerful.
What do you think of moral courage? What's your take?
You see, I've always aspired to be a blues man in the life of the mind and a jazz man in the world of ideas. And so it's very much grounded in the cultural expressions of a particular slice of humanity. Chocolate slice of humanity. Nothing against vanilla, you know, but...
Or in this world of diversity, red velvet.
And red velvet, and just so many other beautiful colors. But it means for me, first and foremost, that to be a militant for gentleness, and to be a subversive for sweetness, to be a radical for tenderness, and connected, but taking a stand with a vision that tries to lure from you the best of who you are and what was injected into you by your parents, your grandparents, the school, and so on. And it's very rare these days we talk about moral courage. We live in a land of smartness and dollars. And courage tends to be either confined to military operations. But moral courage goes beyond fearlessness. It goes beyond boldness. It goes beyond rashness. It has an end. It has a telos. It has a deep spiritual anchorage and grounding. And that's what's so magnificent in your life, in your work vision, and in your witness, you see. What led you both to this discourse of moral courage, but also this magnificent institutional breakthrough of a moral courage TV?
Well, I have to say it's a combination of factors. I know that most people who know my work at all know it for how it began. Islamic reform. And believe me, I was not being accused of moral courage when I wrote my first book, The Trouble with Islam Today. But as more and more people, both Muslim and non-Muslim, came up after events to say, we need voices like this. And I emphasize, non-Muslims said to me, in my community, in my religion, in my culture, we need more voices like this. And for 10 years, I've heard things like, that's so inspiring. You know what I want to hear, though, Dr. West? I don't want to hear that's inspiring anymore. I want to hear, this is what I'm going to do with my moment of inspiration. I want to hear action. I want to get emails from people, tweets from people, Facebook posts from people a month from now saying, this is what I am doing with this moment of inspiration. And so part of the Moral Courage channel has come out of, frankly, my own deep frustration with the feeling that so often people assign to themselves of powerlessness. Every one of the stories on Moral Courage TV is about somebody who does something. It's about the doing, not the talking. That's number one. Then number two, it's not to say conversations don't matter. Boy, do they matter, and let me give you some evidence of that. This channel really is a 13-year dream in the making. Many of you know I'm a Canadian citizen, and you might also know that the BlackBerry was a Canadian innovation. I bring that up because 13 years ago, I had access to the very first BlackBerries. And one day in Montreal, where my now late grandmother was living, I was on my BlackBerry, and she said to me, "Is that a TV in your hands?" And I never even thought of it as a possible TV. But it hit me at that moment that she is seeing something that I didn't even think of. This is a woman who had no formal schooling, who grew up in abject poverty, and who reminded me of the power of one question. And over the years, through 9/11, through 2 books, through the creation of the Moral Courage Project, somehow I never forgot about the dream of a TV channel telling deeply human and hopeful stories that can be in your hands. So in many ways, it's a tribute, this channel, to a woman who was much older than I was and who shows that you don't have to be a young whiz kid to ask important questions.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Now this was this Sister Lila. Was her name Lila?
Yeah, her name was Layla. How'd you know that? How'd you know that?
I read it somewhere, but it just, I could feel her spirit. I think she's smiling on you right now.
You know what I'd
She's
like to call her,
smiling
by
on
the
you
way?
right now.
I call her Layla Liberty.
Layla Liberty.
Yeah, as in Lady Liberty, you know, because around me at least, she always felt free to ask the questions that she either couldn't or wouldn't around other people.
Wow, wow.
Her freedom is very much embedded in my own work, Layla Liberty.
I mean, it's very interesting because, you know, in Plato's dialogue, the Laches, which is about the question, what is courage?
Yeah.
That the use of the Greek word parrhesia, which means fearless speech, frank speech, plain speech, unintimidated speech, is used so often associated with courage. And in our day, who enacts parrhesia, who is Socratic, and Layla raising courageous, unsettling questions, profoundly Socratic, without having gone to school. So a university can go through you without you going through a university. Oh, yes, indeed, indeed, indeed. God bless Layla. But you saw our dear brother Gabe raise a question about the relation to social entrepreneurship. and social change. How do you get a project off the ground? I mean, you're 13 years, you got vision, you got these wonderful people, I've met magnificent persons from all around the world working with you. But how do you finance it? How do you gain access to credit, to capital? We still live in a capitalist society. We've got to be able to survive. No matter what our critiques are, we know, in fact, that we have to be able to proceed. How did you get this off the ground?
Well, I decided, in seeing the success of my 2 books and those royalty checks come in, I decided that I've got to do something with that money. Now, I don't want to give the impression that I'm wealthy. I'm not. But I have enough to get this off the ground. And I decided, therefore, that the savings were there for a reason. And my refugee mother, daughter of Layla Liberty, taught me enough about how to save. But what she herself didn't have was what more to do with it beyond preserve yourself. So the greater good became telling stories of individuals around the world who are speaking their truth and acting on their truth with the hope that all kinds of people will see that if they can do it, and they're not MLK, and they're not Gandhi, and they're not Nelson Mandela. If they can do it, why can't I? That is the reason that I could overcome the money issues with which I was raised, the constant fear of poverty, and decide the intention is good. There will be a strategy to all of this. Let's see what comes of it. And so part of the strategy is to finance this channel myself for the next 2 years in a way that gets it to the point, both in terms of developing a broad global community and in terms of showing good numbers, ratings, if you will, so that we can attract the right investors to the channel. Because I'm going to need investors, but they've got to be the right investors. And let me give you a sense of what I mean by that. About a month ago, I was in the UK, and I met in my final meeting of that trip at the airport on my way back to New York with somebody from a very large media outfit. And he gave me an excellent piece of advice. He said, Irshad, don't sell too early. He said, what you've got here is so powerful that, speaking as a man in the corporation, I'm asking you to understand how precious this is. And that despite the temptation to sell for the sake of financing it, if you sell too early, it won't be what you are seeking to finance. And I loved that that advice came from a guy who had been intimately involved in a company that was distributing for 25 years Oprah's own show. He knew whereof he spoke. And that it came from someone deeply embedded in corporate culture who nonetheless was so human as to understand that dreams matter. You know?
Absolutely.
So I want to say one other thing about strategy. One of our strategies to grow the global viewership of Moral Courage TV is that each and every episode, like this one, is instantly available, not just in English, but in Arabic, in Spanish, in French, and in Bahasa Indonesia. That is not a good money-making strategy right now. and there's a very simple reason why that's not a good money-making strategy right now. It's not just because there are expenses involved in translation. That's almost beside the point. It's also because purchasing power differs in different parts of the world, and therefore, a set of Indonesian eyeballs will garner far less advertising revenue than a set of American eyeballs. Okay, that's the stark reality of the market. And so, if I wanted to sell this channel to any major media conglomerate, do you think those translations would happen? Not right now. But I'm not doing this strictly for an American audience. This vision of moral courage is universal. Every human community needs its constructive dissidents, its tender radicals. And so we've got to go global with this message. That's also part of the strategy for finding the right investors.
Yes, yes. I love that phrase, constructive dissident.
I love tender radical.
Yeah, well, I hear you, I hear you.
And before you move on, because you're hearing me, let me just
Yes.
say that, you've got your cards on which to write your questions. Do that in the next few minutes. There will be people who are taking the cards so that we can get to as many of your questions as possible.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I'm blessed to teach a course on one of the great exemplars of moral courage in the barbaric 20th century. I'm talking about Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel.
Yes,
Such
indeed.
a giant and spiritual genius. And he used to say that our contemporary societies are characterized by a callousness to catastrophe or an indifference to criminality. And if moral courage is going to shatter that callousness, make us compassionate, shatter the indifference, and make us loving and kind and willing to serve others, then you have to pay a cost. Could you say something about how being morally courageous is tied to bearing burdens, paying a cost, preserving a sense of humility so we can hold at arm's length the pathology of self-righteousness, but still being able to take a stand?
You mentioned one of my heroes, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel.
Oh,
Now,
yes.
for those of you who don't yet know about him, a towering figure in the civil rights movement in the 1960s. And this man had moral courage, and let me explain what I mean by that. You know, at the time, he went to the front lines, and he linked arms with the African American leaders of the civil rights movement, and he was actually criticized by many Jews in the South who pointed out to him that, don't you realize that by doing this, you are only helping to increase anti-Semitism in the South? Because when white people, white Christians, see that a Jew is front and center, they're taking that out on us. And what did he do? He understood, he listened, he had the humility to listen, and he said, no. No, I understand that this may cause already anti-Semitic people to express their prejudices that much louder. But we've got to work all for a vision in which we begin to see each other first and foremost as human beings, first and foremost as the complex individuals with delicious stories in our own backgrounds, like Layla Liberty, you know?
Oh, yes.
We've got to work for that vision in which we can see each other that way rather than as Jews, as whites, as Christians, as Muslims.
It's as human beings.
As human
At
beings,
the
first and
deepest
foremost,
level.
who have the capacity to express individuality, meaning their own uniqueness even within their communities, sometimes to the consternation of the leaders of those communities. To work for individuality without letting it devolve into individualism. That, in my view, is the legacy of morally courageous giants like Abraham
like
Joshua
Heschel.
Heschel. And obviously like Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh,
himself.
Fannie Lou
Of
Hamer,
course.
Dorothy Day, Grace Balls,
Yes.
and we can go on
Yes.
and on. And that moral courage can become contagious. I mean, it's no accident that a significant number of young people who went into gut bucket Jim Crow Mississippi and apartheid Mississippi in the 60s were Jewish brothers and sisters under the age of 25,
Right.
trying to be true
Yep.
to the same prophetic witness that Heschel was talking about. The question becomes, how does that moral courage become contagious today? How does it filter through social entrepreneurship spill over into taking a stand in various other forms.
Right.
And what role do you see Moral Courage Channel playing down the road, as it were? What do you see 5, 10 years from now, especially among those I would call new school, because I'm old school. You can see that. you new school too. You see.
Sir, if you're old school, give me old school any day. Really, really. The new schoolers need the support of old schoolers like you, I'll tell you.
Well, we need each other. We need each other.
We do need each other.
That's right.
What do I
That's
see?
right.
I see, it's exactly because I realize, and this is hardly an original insight, that we're living in a multimedia universe. That rather than write another book, I decided now is the time to put the royalties from the books into a video platform that will tell stories that are very short, like it or lump it, but subscribe anyway. Stories that are very short, that can indeed be translated. That's also part of why these can be translated, because they're not 30-minute documentaries, and that can be pushed out into those devices that kids around the world are using to get their information. Now, again, I want to emphasize, not just American kids. You know, our cell phone culture in this country is frankly nothing compared to how mobile phones are used throughout the continent of Africa and throughout Southeast Asia. And so to write another book would not, I believe, have achieved the kind of reach that a video platform like this can. But what more? What more are we asking people to do beyond watch? Certainly we're asking them to ask questions about themselves and about their roles in their communities. But also, we're looking to create not a community of identity, i.e. Muslims, Jews, Christians, feminists, socialists, capitalists, etc. No, a community of values, of people right around the world who appreciate the importance of critical thinking and who are willing to ask each other the taboo questions. And that's what I've got on my Facebook forum right now, but it can get so much bigger, and it needs to get so much bigger in order then for something like this to become part of people's educations as they're being raised. Why can't this be part of e-learning down the road? Why not? Why can't it be actually turned into a curriculum that institutions themselves can be using? Why not? I'm not interested in creating an institution. Okay? That's not where my passion is. But I'm interested in showing why it's in the enlightened self-interest of institutions to engage younger people with the questions that are raised by a channel like this. You know, questions first and foremost like, what do you stand for? What do you stand for so passionately that you are willing to take backlash in order to promote or defend it? And second, what are you doing about what you stand for?
I see you keep coming to that conclusion of a practical Aristotelian syllogism, which
That's
is
what I
always
meant.
action, 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 action. Not a proposition, it's action, action, action.
The practical Aristotelian syllogism.
No, indeed, indeed. You know, the great W.B. Du Bois used to say that the fundamental question is, what does decency do in the face of oppression, and what does truth do in the face of self-deception?
What does it do, Dr. West?
It tries to exemplify moral courage. And it is it's a long-distance affair because it's up and down. There's a sense in which Samuel Beckett is right when he says we try again, fail again, and fail better. We try again, fail again, and fail better, because in the end we do fall on our faces. And you've been accenting the ways in which we continually bounce back, especially when we connect with one another and use whatever forms of weaponry we have available through social entrepreneurship. It could be through community organizing. It could be in churches, mosques, synagogues. If you're secular and atheistic and agnostic, it can be in other civil institutions in our larger society. But you try to live a life that you can, in some sense, not be ashamed of when your body is put in the grave. That's
Exactly.
some sense of remembrance of those who came before, some sense of memory of those who sacrificed. They set such high standards. That's why, again, like the blues and jazz, right? You pick up the saxophone, and you hear John Coltrane, you say, ooh, I got to practice. Highest levels of what the Greeks call arete, excellence, excellence. But it's tied to the spiritual and the social. It's tied to the personal and the political. It's tied to the existential and the economic, all in one life. Because in the end, what you talked about, the individuality, is what we're talking about. And what a life you have already lived. What a blessed life. What a courageous life. What a visionary life, though.
I'll tell you something about all of this. Dr. West, I grew up with a very unhealthy fear of death and a lot of fear of God. And it wasn't until I started giving myself the permission to identify my calling and work towards it that I stopped fearing death.
Wow.
And when you're a Muslim reformer, it helps not to fear death.
Not to fear death. No, indeed, indeed. No, I think that's true in terms of any structure of domination. It's not just
You're absolutely
dominant
right.
versions, because we know there's prophetic Islam, of course, and Malcolm X is always one exhibition, right? But I'm a Christian, and my God, I've been fighting institutionalized Christianity all my life and losing.
No.
But I'm bearing witness. The same would be true in Judaism. Dominant forms of Judaism. Oh my God, a lot of complacency and complicity, a lot of talk about smartness and dollars flowing, but prophetic Judaism cutting against the grain of institutionalized Judaism. And that's true even in our secular liberal forms. That's true in our Marxisms and anarchisms and so forth and so on. You have to be jazz-like and open to a variety of different voices, but most importantly, find your voice.
Oh.
Find your, and
then
you found your voice.
Use it.
Yes, and do something.
Do something, including fall on your face.
And bounce back.
And bounce back.
Absolutely. Gotta bounce now.
Keep bouncing.
Keep bouncing.
Rubber walls.
That's right.
Dr. West, before we wrap up the formal part of our conversation, given how unorthodox your own life has been, and your own teaching career has been, for which you've taken your share of lumps too, what is your biggest piece of advice, apart from bouncing around? What is your most practical piece of advice for those of us here tonight who are seeking to realize our dreams?
Well, I want to ask you that question. I'm telling you. Will you promise to answer if I answer?
I thought I did.
Well, I think you've given some advice, but at that deep spiritual
All right,
level
I've
of
got
how you've been able to keep going.
I've got one.
Because for me, you see, I decided to get on the love train a long time ago. It's true. Justice is what love looks like in public. Though any justice that's only justice soon degenerates into something less than justice. Justice is rescued by something deeper than justice, namely love, compassion, empathy, and imagination. You see? And once you choose to get on the love train, it means then that you're never going to, even when you fall on your face, you're not going to sell out.
Right.
And you see, in a culture that is dominated by rule of money, people just dangle the cash and folk are so eager to sell out. But you're not going to give up and go to the crack house. The despair is overwhelming. And you're not going to cave in and be opportunistic. You might be prudential, but not opportunistic. Prudential, you hold on to your vision and your principles and you apply it to changing circumstances. Opportunistic, just do anything to get over. The way we see oftentimes in some sectors our business community. The 11th commandment, do everything but thou shalt not get caught. See, that 11th commandment. And that's not confined to them. This is true for every sector, but I've just highlighted them given that I'm in the lower part of New York. So the question, how do you stay on the love train? The only way you stay on the love train is to keep loving, keep fighting for justice, keep trying to be an example. Examples are the go-kart of judgment. But you have to have help, support. You need networks. And that's one wonderful thing about meeting you, that our conversations together not just have been inspiring, but it's provided me with ways of seeing how you've been able to get on the love train with your Islamic step. Because there's different steps you can get on that love train. Different traditions that lead into the struggle for justice, you see. And it's just a beautiful thing to be on that love train with you. I'll tell you that.
I said to a friend earlier tonight that when we brown girls blush, we get even browner. I'd be blushing right now. My one piece of practical Aristotelian syllogism is to remember your intention. Because when you exhibit moral courage, you're going to be accused of many motives. Money, fame,
Right.
more money, more fame. You can't necessarily defeat unreason with reason. So argue as much as you want, but understand that those who aren't interested in hearing may not be convinced. At the end, the person who has to be convinced is you, that you're doing this for the right reason, out of love, not out of hatred, not out of resentment, not out of grievance or out of bitterness, but out of love for the capacity that each of us is endowed with. And when you can remember that through all the zigs and the zags, the peaks and the valleys, you're going to remind yourself of what your intention is. And when you can keep that intention pure, I fundamentally believe the outcome will be as it needs to be. We say in Islam, by the way, what is your niyat? Niyat means intention. The belief being that how you start affects how you end. What is your niyat? And if you can't articulate that to yourself, how can you expect others to understand? Say it to yourself every day. Let it change, but be honest with yourself. And only then can your honesty, your transparency, be witnessed by a wider world. Intention. Okay, with that in mind, I'd like to introduce you to a young man whom you're about to meet on TV, who decided in some pretty challenging circumstances that he was going to be part of the change. Dr. West, I'm going to ask you to take that seat. Absolutely. I will take mine, and we will roll.
Some people hear gunshots and sit right on their steps of their apartment building or their house like it's the regular thing to hear. I wanted to be a part of the change. My name is Kenneth. I grew up in the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn, New York. It was an area that was plagued with shootings. I took a life when I was 17.
While I was incarcerated, I had to make a decision whether or not I was going to leave prison the way that I came in or leave as a different person. There was nothing so hard out there that I couldn't deal with, and I instilled that within me.
I was introduced to SOS, which is an anti-gun violence program.
And as I became a part of it, I seen that I was changing and changing and changing,
and becoming someone better. It's difficult for someone, say from an Ivy League school, to come out here and try to do the job because people are going to look at them like, who are you? You don't know anything about this lifestyle, so why should I listen to you? Actually tell them, look at us. We've been on those corners. We've been the gun carriers. We've been the gun shooters. So don't let anybody tell you that it's not possible to change your life because we are living examples. You allow a person to enter some place, the possibility of them coming out with a firearm is great because you don't know what happened. We hear a shooting, we go to where that shooting is at. We hear gunshots, we go to where those gunshots is at. All right, we go check it out and see what happened. In the beginning, the community was reluctant to assist us, work with us. All right, save our streets. Have a good evening. Some people still look at the high-risk individuals as those individuals that they don't want to be bothered with, that there's no help for them. I got a call that there was a shooting on one of the blocks. We got there and a 14-year-old young man was shot in the eye and killed, and it was one of the individuals that we knew. And this young man was in the process of making that change when he was shot, and he wasn't even an intended target. Our goal is that one day Crown Heights stood up and said, enough is enough. We're not going to accept it in our community.
Don't shoot! I want to grow up! Don't shoot! I want to grow up! Don't shoot! I want to grow up!
I've seen a decrease in the shootings and the killings in this neighborhood, so this is why I take that risk. I am Kenneth, and I am Moral Courage.
Can I just say one quick thing? Do not mistake these stories for feel-good narratives. Yeah, there's good news, but there's only good news because there was bad news. In other words, here's a young man who's willing to go through the fire in order to come out with integrity on the other side. So there's hope, but there's only hope because he decided not to succumb to despair. And that's a choice.
So we have hopefully about 30 minutes or so for question and answers. I'll ask the questions as they appear unedited on the cards, and you guys can just have at it. But I'm starting with this one in the spirit of moral courage on purpose. And it begins, a critic of social entrepreneurship once stated that social entrepreneurship innately focuses on the individual rather than building communities. What are your thoughts on the ability of social entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurs to really change underserved communities?
May I start?
Oh, absolutely.
I am a big believer that social entrepreneurship, frankly, may be the most powerful way to both change but also empower people within communities. Remember that communities aren't abstract entities. They're made up of people. And every person is a unique entity, an individual who still has a connection to a wider group of people, but does not stop being an individual with the capacity for individuality simply because he or she voluntarily associates with or is owned by a community, okay? Now, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Over the years, I've received a ton of communication, correspondence from people in interfaith relationships. Muslim falls in love with a non-Muslim or vice versa, and they're asking, is there any hope for us? Now, part of the reason they're asking, is there any hope for us, is because they themselves don't know of other couples like them. And yet, these questions keep coming. Clearly, interfaith love is a phenomenon And yet there aren't communities yet that are willing to recognize this as a legitimate expression of community building. And so part of what the Moral Courage Channel is doing is creating those hubs in which interfaith couples or intercultural couples or interracial couples can see that they're not alone and can actually exchange concerns and questions with one another, including, how do I talk about this with my own parents? You know?
Absolutely.
And in building that community, the intention is that they will come back to their own families and know at least how to begin constructive conversations at the very level of the family, so that community building, even online, has an impact in the real world of the household. Thoughts?
Yeah. See, I would say that given the scope and breadth and depth of human suffering and social misery in the world, that we all have to be jazz-like and multi-contextual and look at all forms of weaponry to try to alleviate that suffering and that misery. So it means you find yourself in situations in which you are supporting persons and institutions that are forces for good. If we're in Tunisia a year or so ago, you joined the revolution. A year and a few months ago, I joined Occupy. I work with the professional class of those who are trying to be forces of good relative to their context. And social entrepreneurship is a significant development that allows one to use the market in such a way that it's not solely obsessed with just profits, but there is a moral dimension to it. And so the question becomes, are we able to be flexible and fluid enough, as opposed to being dogmatic and doctrinaire,
And see,
to
Dr.
see
West,
all these different forces for good?
this is precisely why I couldn't join Occupy, because the dogma and the doctrinaire nature, the sloganeering that replaced thinking, was something that simply did not speak to my values. And yet I share broad aspirations for justice, for equality, for human dignity.
And the critiques of wealth inequality.
And the critiques of disparities.
Yes. But Occupy was
but
such
so often these critiques come from a place of hatred for the other, of demonizing the wealthy, of demonizing, those who have been monetarily successful. And yet this is exactly why I felt it was important to tell the story tonight of the man, the corporate man, who comes to see me at Heathrow Airport on a Saturday to say, don't sell too soon. You know?
Yeah. But Occupy was such a heterogeneous movement that you could talk to one person 1 minute and get one thing, and talk to somebody else and get something else, because it was so various and capacious in the variety of voices that it had. And so you may have just run into certain dogmatic ones, but you stay later on till the afternoon. And you'll see some non-dogmatic ones in there, because it's so heterogeneous. That was part of criticism.
I got the morning people.
Yeah, exactly. You probably early in the morning. Yeah, they hadn't loosened up yet. But the important thing is that if there is, hatred is the coward's revenge against those who intimidate you. And so it's always cowardly if it's directed toward individuals and persons. But I do think when you love people, you do hate injustice. And you hate the fact that they're being treated unfairly. And in that sense, if it's going to be righteous indignation, that's tied to moral courage.
Right.
And that's what I liked about Brother TJ, our ex-Nazi brother, that he underwent a transformation. And that transformation was a genuine one. Why? Because look at the cost he had to pay. Look at the burden that he bore. It's not too many folks who, well, some of us have seen our names and say, terminate this person. Because some of us live on death threat every day. Thank God that's not normative for the movement. It would be a very small group of people. But this brother he resonated with what some of us have to go through all the time, which is get shot.
Yeah.
From his own group,
Exactly.
even. Back to your point
His
again.
community.
Absolutely. I know that was a long double answer to your question.
That's a perfect segue to the next question in terms of the personal stands that all individuals must make in this space. And the question is, how do we improve the quality of our public conversation, perhaps things like Occupy, et cetera, when different people have opposing ideas of what moral courage actually is and what justice actually looks like?
Well, my first thought in answering or at least addressing that question is we assume too much, I think, about one another based on somebody's income or somebody's skin color or somebody's religion. They must think that. They must vote that way. We gotta stop assuming so much and we gotta start engaging a lot more. You know?
I agree. And acknowledge that the choices and decisions we make are not in any way fully determined by the social roles that we have.
Or that others assign to us that we may not accept for ourselves, but assume, again, based on particular labels, that that's the social role that person has.
Absolutely.
Hence the importance of finding your voice.
Absolutely. And I am a radical libertarian about these things, which is to say, I will fight for the right of other people to be wrong. Because that's part of what it is to be in a democratic experiment.
Right.
But at the same time, when you look at our corporate media, the discourse is just so narrow and it's so truncated. And it's beyond blind spots. It's circumscribed, so you don't even get discussions about drones dropping bombs on innocent children. You know, the discussions about what's going on in education and the privatizing and so forth. So you get they think it's a dialogue, but it's a kind of very narrow chit-chat that mobilizes its data to just reinforce what it already believed in the first place. So it's not Socratic energy, it's just chit-chat. And democracies can't.
And filler.
And just filler.
Yeah.
That's right.
As a matter of fact, I'll quickly let you know that one of the crisis moments that I had came 2 years ago, just after the most intense period of the Arab Spring. And during the Arab Spring, I had been on all kinds of media, but most especially MSNBC. And I remember walking off the set of Chris Matthews' show one night. Actually, it was the night that Mubarak had fled. And so he went live, at 7 p.m. And I remember walking off that set and thinking to myself, they didn't need me to make my commentary. They could have gotten pretty much anybody. There was nothing unique about my voice in that conversation. And that dogged me for a while, so much so that when my book came out a couple of months later, 3 days into the US tour, I was in the makeup chair once again at NBC, and I went into a seizure. Because I remember what was going on up here at the time. And I remember the chit-chat, the morning chit-chat, and I remember feeling, they don't need me for this. There's nothing unique here. There's no meaning in this. This is not my purpose. And boom, unconscious. Wow. And needless to say, it was in recovery that I decided the time was now for Moral Courage TV.
Good. Wow.
This question is for you, Irshad, and I guess relates to what you were just talking about a little bit. Do you have any fears as moral courage develops, or as the moral courage movement develops?
Sure, I have plenty of fears.
All right, great.
I
Next
fear that
question.
you won't subscribe. That's one fear. I fear that, I tell you, I'll be really, really honest with you guys. There's no other way tonight. I fear that what all kinds of people have observed about human nature is true, that we don't, despite our protests, we don't actually want good news. I fear that. I'd like us to prove the observers wrong, but I'm not convinced that we will. The question really is, at this time in history, at a time when it's so easy, sorry, that's an exaggeration, less difficult than ever to uncover corruption, will we rise to the occasion and move beyond the anger that uncovering corruption generates? Will we move beyond the anger and rise to aspiration? It's part of the experiment that Moral Courage TV is about. I want to see whether we rise to the occasion. I'm trying to, but I'm just one person. My team is trying to, but we're just 3 people. So what about you? That's the question I have.
I think we have time for one more question, and I'm trying to decide between 2 of them, so I'm going to throw them both out there. And
that's what's called, in Aristotelian terms, a cop-out.
Well, I want to see you. I've got a really good ending question, but I want to see what you guys do with this one. So I'll start with this one. As morality is deeply rooted in cultural and religious traditions and material conditions, this is a doozy. How do each of you define a universal morality?
Dr. West? Out of respect, I turn it over to you.
I think that to be a featherless, two-legged, linguistically conscious creature born between urine and feces, that's all of us. We all have a need to be loved, no matter what color, no matter what culture, sexual orientation, civilization. We all have a need to be recognized with some significance before our bodies are the culinary delight of terrestrial worms. That's universal.
What he said.
So, I'm going to let that sink in for a second. And so I guess we'll close with the following question. Maybe each of you can answer or respond in turn. And it's name one significant change in the world that each of you would like to see in your lifetime.
Let me go back to the intention with which my own journey since childhood began. I grew up in a violent household. Yeah. And when I was quite young, one night, my father came home ranting that he will kill my mother when she gets home from work. I don't even remember what the issue was. What I do remember was saying to him, "You can't do that in this country, Dad. You can't do that because I can go somewhere. I can go to the police. I can go to social workers. You just can't do that here." And in response, he did what he knew how, which was further violence, and he pulled out a kitchen knife, and he chased me through the house with it. And I raced up to my bedroom and flew out of my bedroom window and scrambled up to the roof. And that evening, clearly one I'll never forget, because I surveyed the neighborhood and I thought to myself, how lucky I am to be living in a society in which I can decide right here and right now, as a little Muslim girl, that it's not gonna be like this when I grow up. That I'm gonna use my education, university or otherwise, to make sure that the situation under this roof is not replicated under my roof. The one change I would like to see in my lifetime, and I think we're getting there, is that more little girls of all backgrounds tell themselves, it doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah, I'd like to see a world where every human being was treated with dignity and decency, and every sentient being had some recognition of its role in a larger organic environment. That's a dream, that's a vision. In terms of a particular policy, I'd like to see the eradication of poverty, wherever it is, this country, Africa, Asia, Middle East, Latin America. My hunch is that I'll just have to bear witness, because we got a long way to go. And it would be nice to try to hold off the impending ecological catastrophe that's just around the corner, but that's part of the struggle too. Oh, he's gone. Oh, you're over here. Just disappeared on
Dr. West, do you sometimes get the sense that you're not talking to anybody in particular?
It was just a disappearing act. Just so handsome, I wanted to make sure I keep track of him. That's what it is. But I just want to end by talking about action again. We need to subscribe to the Moral Courage television channel. And so I think we ought to just take this moment to pull out your cell phones and just subscribe. Is there a, oh, that's it right, you got it right there? Oh, that's all. That's it right there. That's it right there. Let's have a major takeoff on this
You
Moral
gonna subscribe?
Courage. Oh, absolutely.
How do I know?
I'm going to talk to Sister Maria.
His assistant?
Absolutely, because I don't have a computer. I'm old school, I told you that. You know that too. So I can just subscribe right through the computer.
Yes, you can,
I'm
sir.
gonna
right
have
through
to do
the
it tomorrow. I'm
computer.
gonna have
I
to do it
love
tomorrow.
that.
Absolutely.
I love that.
Right through the computer. That's exactly
Like
right.
a force through the computer.
That's right.
I will, you know what? I'm going to ask, right, remember how I said earlier, right, that I want to hear, that was so inspiring. I want to hear, this is what I'm doing with my moment of inspiration.
Yeah.
I want you to email me, Dr. West, and I want you to tell me, with this moment of inspiration, I have just subscribed to the Moral Courage channel. Can you do that
And
for
it
me?
won't take a whole month either.
It won't.
I'm doing it tomorrow.
No,
I'm doing it tomorrow.
Lovely.
Absolutely.
Lovely.
Let's
And
salute our dear sister. Let's salute our dear sister, Irshad. Irshad. Yes, yes. We love you. We respect you. Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
And I've got a gift for Dr. Cornel West.
Ooh.
Now, I know that you have a standard outfit. Out of respect for your diversity, I will not call it a uniform. But you do have a way of presenting yourself. And so we figured, at the Moral Courage Project, we figured black and white, okay?
Got the right colors.
Got the right colors. And I think we've got the right message. Stand for the right to question.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So even if these are your pajama tops, we will be terrifically honored if you were to make this something you'd be proud to wear.
Ooh, thank you so very much.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I mentioned the kind of change I'd like to see in my lifetime, and towards which I know Dr. West are working. You're about to meet again Omneya Hegazi. Now, she performed at the beginning of this event, and she'll close it off as well. But I want you to know why she is an exemplar of moral courage, why we believe she's exactly the kind of woman who believes and who lives out the creed that the status quo doesn't have to be this way. And with that, we will roll.
A lot of Muslim men could benefit from learning how to deal with a woman and a little bit of skin, to be frank. My name is Omneya, and I'm a singer-songwriter.
Why don't you stop yourself and learn some self-restraint? Why should you just be free while I stay here to suffocate? I'm not an object but a woman, don't you see? It would do you some good to learn the way to talk to me.
I sometimes disagree with the sense of modesty that is often taught in Islamic culture. You get the sense of, I have to hide. My body is poisonous. It makes men do bad things. Instead of strengthening the will of men, teaching self-control, we teach women that we need to cover up and protect ourselves. There's the wrong emphasis here. Dance taught me to be okay with my body and not be ashamed. You're essentially celebrating what God created. And if you look at it in that light, it's actually a really beautiful and holy thing. Maybe like,
more action on the...
Bump, bump, bump. Try strumming up. So the first drum is down, right? I think that the very root of what I do is sort of rebellious. The idea of a female singer-songwriter, we need more of that in Arab culture.
You put me in a state.
There have been people who don't quite take to what I do. I've even had my own friends disagree with things that I've said. I've been asked to change my lyrics. Someone recently actually emailed me and said that I should burn in hell for all of eternity. A woman came up to me after a performance, and she was completely covered from head to toe. The only thing I could see were her eyes, and she said to me, "Thank you for saying that. I always thought that, but I could never say that." People don't have to agree with what I do. At the height of Islam, it was diversity of opinion, and that's where the Muslim culture is lacking right now.
What if we took back a place in this dying human race? What if we stood side by side and changed the world with all grace?
It's one thing to preach to people, to say, well, this is how the world should be. But it's another thing to appeal to someone's emotions.
I am Omneya, and I am Moral Courage.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to reintroduce Omneya Hegazi and let you know that she will now be playing the very song that was highlighted in that story. The song is called Grace.
Yeah, yeah.
Back again. Thank you to Irshad and Dr. West for having me. Thank you so much. It's an honor. And this song is called Grace. It's for all the ladies in the audience. Yeah. And for the men who know how to treat them.
Before it poisons all our souls. Cover your mouth before it tells us something we don't know. weakened men who just might lose their faith. Our heads are full of concern, so why is it that we should hide? Whoever gave you the right to step on our pride? What if we stood up right now, just spoke out and sung out loud? What if we all danced with joy for what we are, would it annoy? What if we took back our place in this dying human race? What if we stood side by side and changed the world with all our grace? Grace, grace, grace. Why don't you stop yourself and learn some self-restraint? Why should you just be free while I stay here to suffocate? I'm not an object, but a woman, don't you see? It would do you some good to learn the way to talk to me. Our hearts are full of so many dreams, and so much more that we can't achieve. Are you scared you might not be able to compete? What if we stood up right now, just spoke out and sung out loud? What if we all danced with joy for what we are, would it annoy? What if we took back our place in this dying human race? What if we stood side by side and changed the world with all our grace? Grace, grace, grace. You can keep on trying to hold us down, keep us blind and dumb so we won't figure out all your sad attempts to take control of our bodies, minds, and of our soul. What if we stood up right now, just spoke out and sung out loud? What if we all danced with joy for what we are, would it annoy? What if we took back our place in this dying human race? What if we stood side by side and changed the world with all our grace? Grace, 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 grace. Thank you.
Wow. Another round for Amneya. That was extraordinary. Thank you so much, Amneya. And please join me in thanking our guest tonight, Irshad Manji and Dr. Cornel West, for that great conversation.